Have you ever known anyone who has passed away? Now, guidelines on the person who's passed away. They must have a terminal illness or permanent disability, and it caused them to die naturally. Have you ever known anyone who has committed suicide? What happens if these two things were merged together? Someone who has a permanent illness or a permanent disability having the right to commit suicide under federal law. In the book, Me Before You, Jojo Moyes writes about a character named William Traynor. He gets hit by a motorcycle and he gets paralyzed from the chest down, causing him to become a quadriplegic. A quadriplegic means someone that cannot take care of themselves. They are paralyzed and they must have everything done for them. Now, William Traynor can feed himself and he can move his arms somewhat, but he still needs a lifelong caregiver because he can't do everything on his own. He needs help all the time. Well, Louisa Clark goes to the job center and decides to apply for this job and gets it in a couple of minutes. The next day, she goes to Will Traynor's house and meets a very handsome young man sitting in a wheelchair. Now, this very handsome young man has no will to live. He has tried to commit suicide twice already, and it becomes her life mission to try and convince him to stay alive. She takes him out to horse racing and to a very fun camp for people that also are quadriplegic, but everything she does doesn't convince him. He gets a letter from a place in Switzerland that offers to help in his suicide mission or his right to die. Now, this place in Switzerland only accepts people who have permanent disabilities or terminal illnesses, and they decide that William Traynor is going through enough pain and torment that he is one of the people that they can use in the trial experience. Now, I'm not one to ruin an ending to a book, but I bring this up because it actually connects with my topic pretty well, and it's a very unique law that's coming up in Oregon. In 1997, the state of Oregon in the United States of America passed a law called the Death with Dignity Act. It was first put into action in 1994, but it didn't have enough votes to become a law quite yet. In fact, it was 1% short, or 1% short. The Death with Dignity law was made to help those who have terminal illnesses or permanent disabilities and are set to die within the next 6 months from diagnosis. It is a lethal prescription taken by liquid, which is going to be 10 grams, or pill, which is going to be 9 grams, and it puts the person to sleep before removing their heartbeat. This is a very complicated law that comes with about 20 rules and regulations to make sure that the prescription doesn't fall into the wrong hands or is given to someone who doesn't need to take it. 1,127 people have died from the lethal prescription since the law was enacted. It is such an uncommon prescription that only 1% of doctors in Oregon have actually written it out. 1,857 prescriptions have been written over the years, and that means that roughly 40% of those who ask for the prescription don't end up taking it. The median age for those who ask for their prescription is around 72 years old, and the patients are usually dying from cancer or a disease, which most commonly for elderly people is going to be heart disease. The most common ethnicity among these people is Caucasian or white, and most of these people actually have a college bachelor's or over. In this recent couple of years, the law has actually made quite the impression. More and more states have been wanting to adopt the act. With more states wanting to adopt the law, more people are learning about it, and the more people who are learning about it are wanting to take the prescription. The law itself is being called assisted suicide or right to die. And the most interesting thing is the law doesn't count people who die under the act as suicide. With that in mind, let's move on to what you have to go through to get this prescription in the first place. Before everything, the person must be over 18 and a legal resident of Oregon. Now, there is no time limit on how long you have to be an Oregon resident. You could have lived there for 3 days, for 3 hours. You could have just been renting property or staying in a hotel. As long as you can convince a doctor that you live there, you can get the prescription. A doctor even admitted to saying that as long as you can convince someone that you live there, you're able to get the prescription. Then the patient has to ask for the liquid or pill twice verbally and once written on an official document. After that, the doctor has to ask a patient a list of questions, making sure that they are mentally capable and that they can communicate effectively. Next, they have a second doctor come and evaluate everything, making sure that the first doctor is under the correct impression. There must be 2 other adult witnesses that are in the room saying that the person does in fact have all these illnesses or is in the state of being in which they are, where they are able to die in the next 6 months, and say that the person actually does want to pass away under the lethal prescription. Next, the patient has to go through a mental screening to make sure that they aren't under the influence of depression, dementia, or Alzheimer's. Only 5% of the people who have asked for the prescription have been turned down because of these mental illnesses. Now, if it's depression, they can go to therapy, and if their therapist says that it's okay and they can go ahead and go through with the prescription, then they are allowed. The doctors must confirm with the patient on other alternatives, saying, well, if it's cancer, you can go through chemo. If it's heart disease, then we can try and give you all these pills, but we don't know if they will work. If the patient still wants to proceed with the medication, then they contact someone that's the closest of kin, a son, a daughter, aunt, uncle, mom, dad, grandma, grandpa. And once the patient has said that they want it and everything goes through, then it only takes a couple of days for the prescription to come in. The patient is allowed to refuse the dosage at any time. They can stop the process whenever they want, but after it's in the body, they can't reverse it. Up until recently, there weren't any problems with the medication. No one had ever had problems with it up until one person took it and they woke up a couple minutes later. When it happened to one person, everyone batted an eye. Maybe it was just a coincidence. Maybe they didn't get enough of the prescription in their bodies. So then they fixed it, and they thought everything was going to go fine again. But when 6 more people had waken up from the prescription, something's going wrong. Now, they can't find the connection between the first 7 people, but they're still trying their hardest to make sure that the prescription is unflawed. The most interesting part of this entire experiment, though, was to find out that a woman, the 8th victim of waking up, decided she was going to take the liquid, and she drank her first sip 5 minutes from her last, when it's only supposed to be 2. The doctors hadn't encountered someone who wasn't drinking it fast enough, and they didn't know what the side effects would be. Turns out the woman went into a coma that lasted 117 days before she died of natural causes. It's a terrifying thought to think that you have made the decision to die, and then you actually come back to life. You have to deal with the denial of yourself with your family and friends, and think of another solution. So, what are we going to do about that? Well, it's every state's choice to make the decision on whether or not they think they should have the law or they shouldn't. What's my perspective on it? I have lost someone, and it wasn't to a terminal illness or to a permanent disability, but if I could take it back and they did have a permanent illness or a permanent disability, I would tell them it's their life and it's their choice. You shouldn't stop someone from doing what they want if it's their own life. So, should states adopt this law? I think it would be helpful, and not so many people would be moving to Oregon to go. But again, it's the state's rules of what they think that should go for their people. You want to make sure that the people under this are actually happy and that they're doing what they need to survive. Thank you so much for listening to my speech.